So one of my favourite books when I was a child was The Hobbit, and I started reading The Hobbit after I watched Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I really loved this book, and I listened to the audio cassette tape of basically, what we have is today is audiobooks, but I listened to that and you used to have to change the tapes. It was like 6 different tapes. It was really long. But also I used to play the old style game on GameCube, and I just really loved The Hobbit. And the movies were pretty decent. The first 2 were alright, and I kind of really liked the second one, but the third one was just a bit of a joke. Really, it's just so stupid. Like, the stuff that they added in were pretty crazy, like these massive worm things, dwarves riding pigs, and just the CGI was really weird throughout the whole thing. I need to watch the extended editions, but overall, I did sort of like those movies. I wish they'd just done a bit better. I'd say maybe the Star Wars prequels are better than the Hobbit movies. But as I have become older and I've learned about international politics, international political theories and everything, I've started viewing The Hobbit through the prism of Marxism. And it's got me thinking that, did Tolkien really mean for The Hobbit not to be a children's book about, a fun little adventure in a fantasy world, but to actually be a Marxist tale of class struggle and wealth redistribution? Perhaps Tolkien was trying to urge people from a young age to rise up and destroy the capitalist dragons of society and help, redistribute the wealth among the workers and the poor. England was pretty poor after World War I and World War II. He might have been influenced by that, and despite being an Oxford professor, maybe he did share a lot of Marxist sentiment. So let's get into why The Hobbit is actually a nice little Marxist tale of wealth redistribution and class struggle. Perhaps with this in mind, the film may have looked a bit like this. So to set up why The Hobbit is actually a tale about Marxist themes, we must look at Middle-earth through the prism of Marxism. So in typical Marxist theory, we have the aristocracy, who look down on the bourgeoisie, who themselves look down on the proletariat. So where do our various Middle-earth races fit into these classifications? So the Elves are obviously the landed aristocracy. They are immortal, they are extremely wealthy, and they are very well educated. And now we have, in the context of the Hobbit story, the Lake Town men who represent the bourgeoisie. They're pretty wealthy, there's a lot of merchants within them, they have a nice successful trading route with the Mirkwood Elves, and in general they're pretty much more well off than all the other races we see in The Hobbit. Now we get to the dwarves, the heroes of this tale. The dwarves are the proletariat, they're industrial workers, they're miners, they are the hard workers of Middle-earth, and they get all this dirty work done, and they are exploited for their wealth, as we can see what Smaug did to them. So now we get to the hobbits. While the hobbits live quite a nice life, I was kind of tempted to put them in the aristocracy, but they are seen as lower than everyone else, so I'd fit them more into rural peasants. And as most people know, that rural peasants kind of can fit into Marxist revolution, but a lot of the time they're sort of omitted because Marxism was written in the industrial age and it's more focused on industrial workers seizing the means of production rather than rural peasants. But I guess they could be included, and in Mao Zedong's China, he changed the proletariat to the peasants because China did not have an industrial workforce. So with this context in mind, let's look at the actual narrative of The Hobbit. So Bilbo Baggins is a pretty ordinary, lazy hobbit who lives in Hobbiton before Gandalf comes and sort of forces him to go on this journey. Perhaps we could view Gandalf as sort of like a nice Marxist leader. Perhaps he even is Karl Marx. Pushing Bilbo on this quest of class struggle and redistributing the wealth and everything. Perhaps he is the Karl Marx figure, but he's just in the background pulling the strings so these dwarves and Bilbo sees the means of production. Now we must think about why the dwarves in Thorin Oakenshield's party want to go on this quest. So Thorin Oakenshield was kicked out of his kingdom of the Lonely Mountain by Smaug the dragon, who then proceeds to sleep on a bed of money. He forced all the dwarves to flee from the kingdom and killed many of them. Perhaps we could see this as an allegory for capitalism. You know, a lot of times capitalists come in, merchants or bourgeoisie or even an aristocracy, and they decimate a community by exploiting them and then just hoard the wealth all for themselves. Perhaps Smaug is just a representation of a capitalist monster. But it is also tempting to see Oakenshield as a bourgeoisie figure. Of course he is a prince, and because he's at the top of the hierarchy of the dwarf party, perhaps we could even see him as oppressing the rest of them. But there are, however, things that contradict this, namely that Thorin actually gets stuck in with a lot of the hard work and a lot of the fighting, and he eventually even dies fighting for, the means of production which are represented by the kingdom of the Lonely Mountain. So it's kind of contradictory, and I'd say maybe Thorin isn't an oppressor in this sort of context, but he is quite authoritarian in a lot of instances. So throughout Bilbo and the dwarf's journey through Middle-earth, they fight goblins, they fight giants, they fight spiders, and they just go through various different regions. They do get some help from the aristocracy in one point, because they travel to Rivendell and they meet Elrond, who actually helps Thorin and the party find a way into the Lonely Mountain. So this is a sort of positive representation of the aristocracy, but because of the tensions between elves and dwarves, it still exists, the tensions between the proletariat and the aristocracy. But the party eventually get to Lake Town, and this is where we get our first taste of the greed of the bourgeoisie in Middle-earth. Lake Town is full of industrious folks, like merchants and fishermen, and the master of Lake Town is just obsessed with capitalism. He's obsessed with trade with Mirkwood, he's obsessed with wealth and what Smaug has and everything like that. So he's another good example of an elite bourgeoisie figure. And although the Lake Town bourgeoisie are pretty well off, they seek the destruction of Smaug to get even more wealth for themselves. They're greedy, they want wealth for wealth's sake, they want to live beyond their means, a lot of them. So it is a good representation of the bourgeoisie. So when Bilbo and the party get to the Lonely Mountain, Bilbo sneaks in wearing the One Ring to go invisible, and he accidentally reveals to Smaug that they had help from Lake Town, and Smaug flies off to go destroy Lake Town. And this is where Bard the Bowman actually kills Smaug. So what does Smaug really represent? Let's get in more in detail. I sort of mentioned it before, but let's talk about it a bit more. So Smaug is a capitalist monster. He could either be interpreted as the landed aristocracy or a high member of the bourgeoisie who has really come in and just got the wealth off the backs of the proletariat. He's pretty much stolen it. And he's living way beyond his means. He's actually just hoarding all his wealth. He doesn't even need this. Just like the bourgeoisie and aristocracy do. And it is tempting that the Lake Town men, even though it's not theirs, they feel entitled to a slice of this new wealth. Fair enough that Lake Town is destroyed in The Hobbit, but I think it's making an overall bigger point that the bourgeoisie are just greedy, and they will come in whenever they feel they have a chance to get more money. The goblins also hear about Smaug dying and they want the wealth themselves, so Thorin Oakenshield sends for his proletariat brothers, I think it's from the Grey Mountains, led by Dane the Dwarf, and they all come down to fight for the Lonely Mountain and fight for the means of production against the goblins, and they join together with the bourgeoisie forces of the Lake Town men and the aristocracy represented by the elves. And what this battle shows is that these classes are sometimes willing to join together to fight for greater accumulation of wealth, particularly the bourgeoisie and the aristocracy, because the proletariat dwarves are fighting to reclaim what is theirs. They're fighting to reclaim their homes and their livelihoods, and they're fighting for the means of production, whereas the men and elves are simply fighting for more wealth, and they are already pretty wealthy. They're just fighting for their own greed. Once the battle is over, Thorin is dead, and so are a few of the other dwarves, and the wealth gets redistributed among the various classes, which isn't very satisfactory to us because we feel it really just belongs to the dwarves, and we're a bit annoyed that the bourgeoisie and aristocracy have come in and sort of stolen wealth that they didn't make. They're stealing wealth off the backs of the proletariat, as they always do. But there is a silver lining, because the master of the Lake Town is given money to rebuild Lake Town, but he runs off, and the people elect Bard the Bowman as their new king, and they sort of reject the wealthy in Lake Town. So perhaps there is hope later and we'll become a more socialist society where they all help each other to make this place great, just like the proletariat dwarves often do with their societies. And it is a nice ending that the proletariat dwarves, led by Dane, reclaim the Lonely Mountain for dwarves and reclaim the means of production for this kingdom. And even though Thorin's dead, it's a nice little end to this class struggle that they've been on, and they've got a lot more wealth as well as a result. It's helped the proletariat rise up to a new position of power. So throughout this video, we've sort of talked about all the other characters, but we haven't talked about Bilbo, who is the titular character of The Hobbit. Now, Bilbo represents his, low class in astounding fashion. He does what needs to be done. He does all these heroic acts without questioning his position, without questioning where he fits in the hierarchy. He talks to elves, men, and he sort of never gives it a second thought. He works hard for the group, and he doesn't think about his station in the class hierarchy. He breaks through the boundaries of the classist society, and he gains the respect of lots of different people, whether they be elves, dwarves, or humans. And his acts of selflessness and heroism sort of show that it doesn't matter what class you are, you can achieve really great things. And it's the potential that exists in all humans, despite what they've been labelled. So with all this in mind, it's actually pretty conceivable that Tolkien did have in mind a Marxist tale when he wrote The Hobbit. Maybe it was aimed at children to even brainwash them into becoming Marxist revolutionaries, but the themes are present there.
Father, see the Dark Lord have it. Osana of many colors!
So anyway, let me know what you think in the video. As you can probably tell, it was a little tongue-in-cheek. I'm not gonna lie, I did stretch the truth a bit there, and I did kind of paint Marxist themes all over The Hobbit, but you can't deny there are some similarities between Marxist themes and The Hobbit, and I'm half serious with this. I kind of feel there are some good representations of what Marx says in this book particularly, but at the same time, it is kind of like a little edgy joke as well. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you like this style of content? If you do, leave a like and subscribe. If you want to follow me on social media, follow me at The Tabernacle on Twitter and Instagram. I also have a WordPress blog. It's a similar name. It's just The Tabernacle WordPress. I try and write at least once a week, but I have been slacking a bit lately. But you can still go on there and check it out. There's lots of good stuff. And if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching.